Let's take you there live.
Its history and its heritage. In embracing these values, it becomes easier for nation building and social cohesion to exist and patriotism to take the center stage. And in embracing these values, it becomes easier to have a common identity that is the core of nation building, social cohesion, and patriotism. The preamble of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa 1996 lays the foundation for our nation's noble mission of building social cohesion when it states that, I quote, "Believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this Constitution as a supreme law of the Republic so as to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Lay the foundation for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by law. Improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person and build a united democratic South Africa able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations." The Freedom Charter, drafted by our forebearers, states that South Africa belongs to all its people who live in brotherhood and sisterhood, enjoying equal human rights and opportunities regardless of color, class, gender, and religion. These ideals of the Freedom Charter are encapsulated in the Constitution of the Republic and the National Development Plan and point to the importance of uprooting any form of exclusion. The strategic plan for the International Marketing Council, which was renamed Brand South Africa, focuses on programs aimed at building a strong nation brand reputation for South Africa. This contributes to nation building, patriotic pride, social cohesion, and a strong competitive identity for South Africa. Patriotism is devotion to one's country. It is devoted love, support, and defense for one's country, and it is national loyalty. Nation building aims at the unification of the people within a state so that it remains politically stable and viable in the long run. It includes the creation of national paraphernalia such as national flags, national anthems, national days, national stadia, national airlines, national language, and so on. National identity needs to be deliberately constructed by molding different ethnic groups into a nation, especially since our country comes from an era of colonialism and apartheid, a practice of divide and rule that resulted in ethnically fragmented populations. Ubuntu then becomes an integral part of the human-centered principles which informs the evolving democratic culture of South Africa. As a cornerstone of African culture, it essentially affirms interdependence, reciprocal and mutual relations between persons. So social cohesion is deemed to be present by the extent to which participants and observers of society find the lived existence of citizens to be relatively peaceful, gainfully employed, harmonious, and free from deprivation. Social cohesion, therefore, goes beyond mere slogans and lofty platitudes about unity and nationhood. Social cohesion is about the lives of the people. While the country's image is not a static phenomenon, however, country images are long-lasting and difficult to change. That is why, in order to improve a country's image, it might be easier to create fresh positive associations than try to refute old ones. Hence, our unique flag with the only one with 6 colors and our inclusive national anthem. Chapter 15 of the National Development Plan is dedicated to transforming society and uniting the country. It contains the ideas and visions of all sectors of our society and calls for a number of things to be done to move South Africa forward towards Vision 2030. It states that unity in diversity will be fostered by a shared commitment to constitutional values, the values entrenched in the Constitution and its preamble, and further expanded upon the Bill of Rights and Responsibilities are part of children's education and should also be promoted among adult South Africans. South Africa needs to build more equitable society where opportunity is not defined by race, gender, class, or religion. This would mean building people's capabilities through access to quality education, healthcare, and basic services, as well as enabling access to employment and transforming ownership patterns of the economy. Redress measures that seek to correct imbalances of the past should be strengthened and prioritized. So it is important to acknowledge the fact that as a new nation, we are not just building brick and mortar, but are also building hearts and minds. The National Development Plan dictates that we must build a common understanding of what South Africa stands for. It also highlights the fact that the key to the country's unity is embracing the reality that South Africans have many identities and yet are South African. It also reminds us that being South African has never been premised on the notion of a melting pot. South Africans need to work continuously to build unity in diversity as espoused in our Code of Arms. On the issue of social dialogue and compacting, the NGC paper points to the SONA speech of 2020, whereby President Cyril Ramaphosa indicated that social compact is a covenant rooted in the strategic objective of our national development plan, which is to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by 2030. Admitting that government cannot solve economic challenges alone, he pointed out that social compacting has been taking the form of mini-compact approach. He had articulated on mini-compacts approach, of which he has articulated on many occasions before. This signaled the placing at front and center the challenge of achieving social cohesion and developing a social compact. South Africa has a long history of trying to achieve the unity, trust, and vision, which, as noted above, is required for social compacting. This was evident at the 2012 and 2020 Social Cohesion Summit hosted by the Department of Arts and Culture, close quote. The paper also recognizes the women's struggles and their exclusion in the mainstream participation in the ANC, whereas the League, despite the non-acceptable of its members in the movement, they were vehemently involved in passive resistance while continuing the campaign against passes for Black women under the leadership of Charlotte Maxeke, whom we celebrate this year under the theme Unity, Renewal, and Reconstruction of the Year, in the year of Charlotte Maxeke. In conclusion, Chair, the ANC NGC paper recognizes that social cohesion can be a critical element of our attempt in uniting the country, deepening our democracy, and making it safer for all who live in it. That such social cohesion has to address the underlying causes contributing to the lack of social cohesion, and that, among others, the post-colonial, post-apartheid, post-1994, and post-COVID-19 sense of woundedness, which different parts of our nation experience in different ways, that this requires the ANC and its government to act as the healers in chief, so that we confront the realities of South Africa with a commitment to making our land a peaceful and prosperous one. So for the ANC to play that role, it must be united and resolute in leadership. That such leadership can help develop a national identity by encouraging the cultural diversity of this country by reigniting the RDP of the Soul Project. And that the addressing of the position of women in South Africa needs urgent attention of the ANC, that patriarchal practices within the organization and the government it leads must be dealt with severely. That at a societal level, we must initiate a multi-stakeholder dialogue aimed at addressing the root causes of gender-based violence and the disempowerment of women in all spheres of society. And that at the center of the social compact must be the involvement of youth and the notion that we want them to inherit a better South Africa. That it will require the mobilization of all leaders to commit to a united South Africa where Ubuntu prevails, as we have been during the 2010 World Cup hosted by South Africa and during the current COVID-19 pandemic phase. So we dare not repeat the atrocities of the past that divided our nation, but together build a better South Africa that many of our people laid their souls for. And lastly, that I believe that the youth of South Africa remains the most politically active and are at the center of generating new ideas for the country. This has the potential to secure the future of the country, especially in such energy and enthusiasm from the youth if that is properly harnessed. And however, their involvement in the life of society is not without challenges. Hence, the agenda of nation building and social cohesion needs to focus on them. Programs of moral regeneration need to be ongoing, and all stakeholders need to come on board, from family upbringing, going back to Ubuntu concept of the child belongs to a society and not only to his or her family. And school curriculum, one believes, need to include this, and the show of patriotism to be embedded at a young age. The hoisting of the flag, the singing of the national anthem are some of aspects that ensures patriotism to one's country and its people. Ngiyabonga, Bongani.
Thank you very much, Comrade Lindiwe, for such a beautiful issue, focusing on the areas that you have just highlighted, including, lastly, the issue of the youth who are inheritors of our democratic society. We move now to the last panelist, Dr. Abba, who, as I've highlighted when I was introducing him, that he has been very much involved in the Injulamiti scenario project. I would like you, Comrade Dr. Abba, to focus maybe largely on issues around social cohesion, particularly what we have found out in this research about how we can bring South Africa together, and also to the obstacles that stand in the way for this social cohesion in South Africa. Dr. Abba.
Thank you, Comrade Chair, former President Jacob Zuma, fellow panelists, comrades and friends who have joined the session. I'm really pleased at the really good turnout for this discussion, and I'm sure everyone's quite excited with this issue because it goes quite fundamentally to a number of questions. As the good advocate had indicated, it's not a departmental thing, it's a societal thing. So the concluding section, I'm quite pleased also, Comrade Chair, that I was honored that myself and two of my co-authors were allowed to draft the paper, and it's been through the NWC and through provincial executive committees, etc. And at each stage, it has been enriched by the discussions that have come forth. So I think what you have is ultimately a collective document, and I thank you for former President Zuma for presenting the outline of the document. The concluding section of the paper says that the situation we're in requires the ANC and its government to act as the healers in chief, so that we confront the realities of South Africa with a commitment to making our land a peaceful and prosperous one. The policy document acknowledges that for the ANC to play that role, it must be united and resolute in leadership. Today, we're quite unique in this policy document because it takes forward a lot of the developments that have occurred whenever we have debated the national question within the councils of the ANC. And President Zuma has outlined a lot of those steps. So today we place the question of social cohesion at the center of attempts to create a united, democratic, non-racial South Africa. Over the past decade, we've been, especially since the early 2000s, we've been grappling on how such cohesion can be achieved and the compacts that are needed. Given the devastating effects of COVID-19, it is critical we continue wrestling with how do we achieve social cohesion. So I'm not going to go through the areas that have been covered by the good advocate and former president, but I think we need to keep in mind that the document talks about the national question as one of unity of all the people as we're liberating South Africa, to the native question, which was used to suppress, oppress, humiliate, dehumanize the majority of South Africans, and social cohesion, which has emerged as the pivotal point that we can achieve both national unity, national identity, and a better South Africa for all. I'm not going to go through all the various stages we've been through, from the Black Republic thesis to the African Claims Document, the Three Doctors Pact, all these, the colonialism of a special type, the Freedom Charter, the debates with the Pan-Africanist Congress, which in itself is a very important debate even up to today, when we look at narrow ideas of Africanism, whereas the wider concept of the ANC. Also keep in mind the contribution of Black consciousness in this, and then eventually the United Democratic Front. But as a good advocate has said, that the foundation of all this was the notion, the commitment to Ubuntu, that humanity that we're saying. So whichever of these political parties we're coming from, which are opposed to apartheid, we're trying to seek that humanity, and how do we ensure that it survives. Now, since 1990, we've been consolidating a post-colonial, we call it a post-colonial democratic nation state. We all know that a lot of those colonial relations have persisted up to today. We've had some really critical points. As you mentioned, Chair, the notion of the Rainbow Nation, speeches around radical economic transformation, the speech around I am an African, and then the notion of South Africa remaining a divided, a country of two nations. So today we've got our land. If you are young, if you are female, if you are Black, and if you're living in a rural area, you have the worst of the lot of South Africa. This is the challenge we must keep in mind, that ultimately it's the liberation of people that intersect around that. The youth are highly unemployed. The very recent NIDS-CRAM survey said about 53% of the youth last year were unemployed. So the starting point we have for social cohesion then is that we need to keep in mind the violence that we're experiencing in our society, the rise of ethnicity, the persistence of racism, and the delays in resolving issues around land. Mampela Rampela has been amongst the analysts who placed their finger on this intergenerational trauma, which is at the root of a lot of that violence. And it's not only physical, it takes the form of verbal attacks, racial tensions, breakdown of family structures, and outbreaks of chauvinism. It also takes the form of political assassination, as we well know, corruption and the looting of both the state and private sector coffers at all levels. The government has declared gender-based violence and femicide a national crisis. And again, as the good advocate has emphasized, we have to place that at the center of our notion of social cohesion. So this is the kind of violence we're talking about when we're saying that we have to deal with violence in our society. It's both physical and non-physical. The second aspect we need to highlight is the rise of ethnicity. Former President Zuma has touched on that. I would like to just quote Comrade David Masondo, who pointed out that yearning for ethnic belonging, which may not be a bad thing in itself. We like to hang out with people we can talk to, joke with in our own language, share cultural experiences, but it also leads to belonging, ethnic belonging also enables ethnic political entrepreneurs in our ANC-led movement to make demands for representation in public institutions on the basis of the ethnicity. And that's something that we have to grapple with. And it says, consequently, nation building simply gets reduced to an ethnic numerical equation. We have to deal with this head on. Then the issue of race. Race continues to carry the greatest weight in defining disadvantage. There's, just as W.E.B. Du Bois said in 1900, that the color line will be the most important line that we'll be dealing with for the whole of that century. I declare again, and I'm sure we all agree, that that has not been resolved up to today. Not in South Africa, not in the world. And we can see this wherever we go. As Gerard Murray of UKZN with other researchers wrote, non-racialism is improbable until inequality is addressed. So keep in mind, all the statistics that we have in the long document about poverty and inequality speaks to the issue of inequality that we have to deal with. Chair, I'm not going to go into the details around land reform, but we can say that it has taken long and will remain unresolved for some time to come. We need to show the will to sort that out. So in this context of woundedness, intergenerational trauma, violence, ongoing racism, and rise in ethnicity, the past decade has seen this focus on social cohesion. So we had 2012 and 2020, the Social Cohesion Summits convened by the Department of Arts and Culture. We had the National Development Plan, which a good advocate touched on, which had two objectives in Chapter 15 of promoting social cohesion across society through increased interaction across race and class, and secondly, achieving a social compact that will lay the basis for equity, inclusion, and prosperity for all. So it's not just a hugging and getting together kumbaya moment, but also looking at the reality of those class differences that we have to deal with, the inequality. The Ndlula Miti Scenario Project was launched. Thank you, Chair, for mentioning it whenever you can. And it aimed at sparking a conversation on what would a socially cohesive South Africa look like, and to what degree is it attainable. The project identified 3 key drivers, and I think we have to keep in mind that these are the drivers that are going to shape the nature of our nation over the next few decades. The one is what we call the triple R of resistance, resentment, and reconciliation. By that we mean that there are feelings in parts of South Africa that too much was done for Black people. And on the other hand, not enough has been done by a democratic country, government, for the majority of South Africans. And so that places in jeopardy the project of reconciliation. So resistance, resentment, and reconciliation. The second one is that of institutional capacity and leadership. Now, we know that we always, and a lot of people in society complain about the capacity of the state being hollowed out, etc. But we want to also say that throughout our society, whether it's in sports administration, religious organizations, we have an issue of capacity and leadership, especially moral leadership. Thirdly, and most importantly, is that of social inequality. We often speak of inequality in terms of incomes, etc., but social inequality talks about the reality that Black people lack in the kind of social capital that allows them access, so that we are stymied in our movement upwards within corporates and organizations. And so the top echelons of management remain largely white and Black. There are 3 scenarios that came up. Chair, I'm not going to go into them, but I think most people would be aware. And they have popular dance names, so I'm glad you're not going to ask me to dance those scenarios either. The one is the AC bourgeois scenario, which is largely where we are today. South Africa torn by deepening social divides, daily protests, and cynical self-interest. Then there's the Naile Walk one, where we all coordinated and we're moving towards achieving the goals of the National Development Plan. And then Gwara Gwara, which embodies a demoralized land of disorder and decay. The bad news is that the overwhelming majority of South Africans believe that we are already in the Gwara Gwara scenario. The good news, I must say, Chair, is that almost a third of the youth population sees us moving towards an Naile Walk scenario. They are optimistic. My age group from 55 onwards is completely despondent. So we need to find a way as the ANC that we encourage the optimism of the youth, reduce the cynicism of the old. And then to conclude, Chair, from the 2020 last year's Department of Arts and Culture conference, there were 4 elements that were identified that should be the pillars of any social compact. So the social cohesion processes that we develop should eventually be part of or lead to and be impacted by a social compact, which one aspect of it would be commitment to an inclusive economy. President Zuma referred to that of the radical economic transformation that is required. So we have looked at compacts around the world, and it's clear that they have been based around economic growth and jobs. These have to be placed at the center of our consideration for any compact that we go forward. Part of that is to encourage more and more entrepreneurship. Most successful nations have apparently up to about 80 to 90% of people are employed in firms that employ less than 10 people. The second one is having a progressive set of social policies. We must recognize that we're addressing the social ills of poverty, hunger, poor health, etc., in a democratic state. We should be able to have policies and capacities to ensure that we deliver so that the lot of our people is improved. We need to make sure that we're